Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Gicherori AB wash processed Kenya from Substance Cafe. And there's the bag right there. And Substance, based out of Paris, France. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel quite a bit over the last few years, including our recent review of the Tabe Burka, a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. And one of the main reasons that they have appeared on this channel so much is because they have become quite easily accessible to us, given that Airworks does bring them in quite often. One unfortunate thing about this coffee is that we received it just after recording our Battle of the Tomato blind taste test rankings video, as not only would this have been an excellent addition into that video given that it is a Kenyan coffee, but I would later find out that it actually had a tomato note on there, so it'll still be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 57. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Substance's recipe, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 91 degrees Celsius. I believe that translates to about, 194 or 195 degrees Fahrenheit. I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, in comparison to a lot of the other coffees we had in that Battle of the Tomato blind taste test video, this one would definitely be on the lighter end of the spectrum, as the shoebox one is the only one that could rival it in terms of lightness, as both of these coffee roasters are ones that are considered to be on the ultra light end of the spectrum. So this one right here definitely skewed in that direction, so it is on the more light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 32, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the coffee was definitely demonstrating plenty of the expected lighter characteristics to it, as it felt like it was opening up a bit, and it was just on the brink of becoming a little bit more intense, as this coffee was a little bit, I don't want to say generic, but not necessarily as intense as I might have hoped for a first impression, as there was a slight bit of savoriness to it and some vegetal characteristics as well. So, as mentioned, I didn't actually know that this coffee had a tomato note when purchasing it. Essentially, I saw that Airworks was offering some standard offerings, and I do like to get standard offerings from Substance, as it does feel like a nice balance to some of the really expensive coffees that we purchase from them. We do have one of their more expensive coffees that we're going to be reviewing here shortly as well, but that was the main reason I purchased this coffee, and in hindsight, when it came out a little bit more vegetal and savory than I was probably expecting, I went and took a look at what they had described on the description of this coffee, and I found out that there was that tomato note listed on there, so I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Day 37 through the Chemex, and the coffee was a little better. It's still pretty savory, but it is offering better intensity to the red fruit characteristics, as it has increased in intensity overall, so it is starting to open up as fully expected. There's still a little bit of lightness, as it can feel subdued at times, but it definitely felt like the coffee was going to open up a bit more from this point going forward. Day 41 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee was the best that had been to this point, largely because it has toned down a bit of these savory qualities to it. And we've had weird success with the UFO brewer on Kenyan coffees recently, as this one also seemed to have some good results. There are still some of the vegetal qualities that do come through in the cool down, but for the most part, I appreciated that it was toned down on the earlier parts of this experience. Day 44 through the V60 with Substance's recipe, 16.67 to 1, 91 Celsius, and the coffee was at its best, as it has the least amount of tomato that it had been up to this point, offering a cleaner presentation of the red fruit and citric qualities to it, with a little bit of a savory background quality, a little bit more reminiscent of a tea-like quality aspect, but not necessarily quite as tomato-like as it had been on the earlier days. Day 49 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee did just seem to perform better with the lower temperatures, as there's less of the savory qualities with this brew method as well, offering a cleaner red fruit and citric presentation again. So coffee for the most part has been pretty consistent and in line with a lot of the expectations. So early days, still a little bit fresh. After some time, it's opening up a bit and it's getting better defined with a little bit less of the savory characteristics to it. Though that would change, as on day 52. I've always wondered what would happen with Substance's coffees if you go the other direction with them and you push them. So that's what we did, 17 to 1 at 99 Celsius. And the coffee is solid, however, it definitely skewed heavily in the savory sense, as there was the most amount of tomato that we had experienced probably from any of the Kenyan coffees that we had featured in that Battle of the Tomato, or based off of any of the experiences that we had with this coffee up to this point. So that was the result from pushing this one. Day 54, we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and same thing, but I was beginning to wonder whether or not it was the adjustmets we made or if this is just the natural direction that this coffee was heading, as it was, once again, pretty prominent in the savory tomato-like sense with a bit of the tea-like herbality too, so some depth, I would say, but maybe not necessarily the type that I was looking for. Day 56 final notes we have through the V60 with substances recipe, and that kind of confirmed my suspicion about this coffee, as it was also pretty savory, as it was honestly the primary characteristic in a long-lasting and pronounced sense. Plenty of bright currant qualities with a little bit of this eucalyptus-like herbality, kind of the best description I could come up with for that. Also a slightly bitter citric zest with an abundance of red florality as well. If I remember correctly, I do believe one of the notes they had listed for this coffee was lemon. I do see it a little bit more of a kind of lemon zest, given that there is that slightly bitter citric aspect to it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that real quick, and then is the finish level 5. I say over and over that when it comes to Kenyan coffees, if they're not scoring minimum level 4 for finish and brightness, then something is really wrong with it. However, this one right here just seems to have a very long-lasting finish, and I still feel that way even as the coffee's cooled down all the way to room temperature, as there's a lot of the lingering savory qualities, though it does dissipate a fair bit once it has reached room temperature, so not quite as savory forward, but off brew, and even when it's cooling down, it still tends to skew pretty heavily in that direction. We'll go ahead and move on. Acidity level 4, very bright coffee. Again, same thing when it comes to the brightness of a Kenyan coffee. If it's not scoring the level 4, then something's definitely off, but this one right here has plenty of those tart berry bright characteristics to it, and given that there's a fair bit of citrus to kind of balance that as well, then it's really not surprising it scored as high as it did. Florality level 4, definitely getting a fair bit of the hibiscus-like characteristics to it. I mean, this one in so many ways epitomizes what you'd expect for a very light-profiled Kenyan coffee between the savoriness, the brightness, and the florality, as they are pretty well defined, especially the floral characteristics of this one, so level 4 where we opted to put that. Berry fruit, citrus fruit, level 4, I'll kind of breeze through those because I don't necessarily think that they're the primary characteristics of this coffee. Yes, it is a Kenyan coffee. Yes, you are getting a fair bit of the tart currants, the cranberry like qualities to it, and same thing with the citrus as mentioned. It's a little bit more in a zest like sense. I can also see a little bit maybe like a lime zest, but outside of that, I think that the focus is actually the savoriness of this coffee, given that you're doubling down between the tomato and the tea-like savory qualities of this one, as both of which are pretty pronounced, and that's one of the main reasons why we have the savoriness at a level 3. I could probably bump it up to a level 4, but I do want to indicate that it's balanced. It's not overbearing. While it is pretty pronounced, it's not to the point where I find this to be just like a super tomato bomb, as some coffees we've either had in the past or coffees that we're also working on, but definitely still skewing on the more tomato side of things. And that's one of the main reasons actually I put the sweetness at a level 3, because I did want to demonstrate that while this coffee is sweet, I still don't think that's the focus. And that's what I really want to highlight within this tasting wheel, is that the sweetness and the fruit qualities don't seem to be the focus of it for me. And that's why I have those both as either kind of a bit of a footnote or something toned down within this one. Same thing with the spice though, that is pretty high compared to what we usually do for a Kenyan coffee. I mentioned there's that kind of eucalyptus-like herbality. It's got a little bit of a different characteristic to it, which I can see being a nice positive for some people. I mostly want my Kenyans to be as stone fruit forward as possible, and sweet, but that's maybe for somebody else. And then a couple things left worth discussing. The body at a level 3. This one, plenty of body, plenty of texture to it. I do believe that Gicherori isn't necessarily supposed to be as heavily bodied as some other Kenyan coffees out there, and for me, I was actually waffling on the higher side of things because this one just offered plenty of texture, a little bit more of that juicy as opposed to like a silky body. So I contemplated putting that a little higher, even though it did reach that level 3 mark. So I was actually at the higher side of level 3, which I guess is counter to what this coffee usually is supposed to be, but I could have that wrong. I'm certainly not an expert on Kenyan coffees, even though we review so many of them. And then the final thing worth discussing, cleanliness level 3. If it's going to have a lot of tomato, as was the case with this coffee, it's always going to be very hard for me to put it above the level 3 mark. And that's kind of what happened right here. I've always wondered how people actually feel about that, because, I mean, if it's a very well-defined tomato and the rest of the coffee is pretty well-defined, then I guess in theory it could be a level 4. But For me, I think it just hinders the coffee enough to the point where I don't enjoy putting it at that level 4 mark. I don't think it kind of accurately represents what I expect in terms of cleanliness for a coffee. So level 3, where we opted to put it, and it's exclusively because of the tomato characteristics. Outside of that, the rest of this coffee is extremely well defined. It's extremely clean. It's a lot of what you'd expect. Even the herbal qualities to it are pretty well defined. So yeah, as I'm looking at this tasting meal, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one right here is one of the most Kenyans that we've reviewed in a set of Kenyan coffees that we've reviewed recently. So by that standard, it's not necessarily going to be my type of coffee. As mentioned, I do prefer my Kenyan coffees to be a little bit more stone fruit forward, a little bit more sweet if I can get them. And this one's skewing much more on the savory side of things, much more on those bright, tart, floral, red floral side of things. None of that's really my type of Kenyan, and I feel like that's pretty well established at this point, but one of the main reasons we continue to go back to review them is because it's always interesting to see what sort of results we're going to get from Kenyan coffees, given that there can be a lot of deviation from either them being super tomato forward or them being a little bit more sweet, a little bit more fresh fruit forward, which again is usually what I'm hoping for, and it's always kind of interesting to see what each coffee roaster's representation of their Kenyan coffee does turn out to be. I think this is actually the second one that we've reviewed from Substance, but I was still curious to try it out for a second time. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This one's pretty easy. If you like your super light profiled and very, I'm going to go with traditional Kenyan coffees, and that's kind of the best way to describe this one, given that it has everything that you would expect for a Kenyan coffee. It's very bright. It's got a lot of the red qualities to it. It's got a lot of bright berry qualities to it. And at the same time, it has a fair bit of these savory qualities, which I know is often heavily desired for a lot of people. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Gicherori AB Wash Processed Kenya from Substance Cafe. Thank you for watching.